Hi, I'm Phil Dispenza, and this is Collecting, Investing, or Somewhere in Between. I decided I was going to make introduction videos to each section, and even though I've released 3 episodes of video games, this one's going actually to be the introduction of video games. I thought about this because I've had, I created episode 1 through 5 already for the video games, and I just wanted to keep the numbering going. So when I move on to comic books, I didn't want to say it's episode 7 and then decide, okay, I want to make a couple more video game episodes. So each section's going to be episode 1, 2, 3. So there'll be a video game episode 1, 2, 3. There'll be comic books episodes 1, 2, 3. Action figures 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. Some might only have one episode, but I thought about just creating each individual episode, having an introduction. So, introduction to video games. You've already seen a few. I wanted to cover just vintage video games, pretty much. I am going to include some later ones, maybe stuff that you might not even consider video games. But what I did already, I started with the Atari 2600. I've covered the 5200, the 7800. I moved on to television, and next episode, technically, if this is an introduction, none of them came out, but the next episode will be ColecoVision and Sega Master System, and then I'm going to be working on a Nintendo. And hopefully I can do more. Like I said, I'm still unpacking boxes and stuff and trying to find other ones, but I'm going to keep this short, maybe 10 minutes long at most. um, why video games collecting in the first place. um, the video games in your house started in the early 70s, and it was basic pongs. I mentioned the Odyssey, Ralph Baer. He actually had a different, it was mostly pongs and uh, alternate versions of Pongs, but they had, light guns early on, where you shoot targets and stuff. Um, and hopefully I'll find my Odyssey 1, because the Odyssey 1 was in itself. And then they supposedly made like separate cartridges they released. But I don't think I ever bought other ones. I don't know if I ever found any. Um, but most people know what Pong is. They grew up with Pong. If you're somewhere around my age, I always say that. Um, I'm dating myself. I always say that too. Um, but the first consoles weren't, and I've mentioned this before. The first consoles that had cartridges were not Atari 2600. It wasn't 2600. People, have this false, idea that Atari was the one who made everything. There was actually 2 systems. The RCA, and everybody knows RCA from televisions, RCA Studio 2. And I think I've mentioned the Fairchild Channel F in some other video already. But those 2 systems, they were not too popular. It was something new. They had to get people, an idea of, um, you know, to do something in your house. That's what Ralph Baer said. Television. He came up with the concept in the late 60s. And, it takes some time to develop. And he tried approaching several different electronic manufacturers like televisions and stuff. And it wasn't until Magnavox took the chance. But he had to make prototypes and stuff. And I'll probably, if I ever get into find my Odyssey 2 and all the games and stuff, I'll just show you the book I bought, signed by Ralph Baer, written by Ralph Baer, before he died. And you can learn something. And again, what's the whole concept of these videos? I mean, there is some investing tips, but you can go on the auction site. Like I always say, I'm not going to try to mention things, but you can go on the auction sites and learn. Do look up searches on a specific game or something, and You could find out if it's, valuable. Maybe you can't find anything, which might make it more valuable. And that's the big thing. You do your research. There's lists of games out there. Like I said, I mentioned I have a price guide from back in the 90s, and I'm using the last edition. I don't remember if it's 7th or 8th edition. It's the last physical edition he ever came out with. And, it was pretty comprehensive. And I think I started buying it at the fifth edition, something like that. And I started helping him out, and things he was missing in the guide, I'd find, certain games, or somehow he missed it. I helped him out. Of course, my name's in the credits in the beginning of the book. But, the video game, I think video games probably should be more of a collecting avenue of collectibles rather than investing. But people are starting to go crazy, and so and I probably will mention them in individual video game episodes. But early on, any system comes out, usually the early games sealed are next to impossible to find. And the reason why, and I think I've mentioned this already in maybe the Intellivision, maybe even the Atari, is that one, if they didn't come sealed, you're not going to get them sealed. But if they did come sealed, most stores would have a sell-through. They would order, say, 10,000 copies, and they would sell out of 10,000 copies. And back then, people played the game. So all 10,000 copies pretty much should have been open. 99.9% of them would have been opened. And as the years slowly progressed, and most of these video game systems didn't last. Atari's an exception because they kept pushing it. It was like 11, 12, 13 years, 14 years even for the Atari 2600. Well, most video game systems didn't last too long. You probably didn't see more than maybe a 6 to 8 year run before they called it quits. Because most companies would improve upon the graphics and improve upon technology. So, a Nintendo, ran whatever regular Nintendo Entertainment System, which I'm going to actually record soon. But, it ran maybe 7, 8 years or something like that. And then what happens? You move on to Super Nintendo, and then you move on to Nintendo 64 or something. So the technology gets better. They make the consoles more powerful, better graphics, better sound, better gameplay. And then you throw in some music and things like that. And early on, it's just bleeps and stuff. You had some semblance of a voice. I remember at times he's like, meh, 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 meh. It almost sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher in a higher pitch. But, you would move on. So you would only come out with so many games, and third party would make so many games, and then you'd move on to the next system. And a lot of them are usually between 6 to 800, the libraries, 6 to 800 U.S. release games. I'm always going to mention foreign, but again, the foreign market is tougher because most of the time you have to buy the stuff from overseas. I mean, some stuff has come to the U.S. Why? Because U.S. people buy foreign things. I used to buy, you just order something from, say, Great Britain and or United Kingdom, whatever you want to call them. But you would buy a 6-pack of some kind of game that was released over there, foreign version, like Cookie Monster Munch I mentioned in Atari 2600. It might have been cheap at the time. So they get brought over, then they distributed in the U.S. And so there are copies in here, in the U.S. But if you're looking for everything or anything in particular, you're going to probably have to pay higher prices now. So video games, why collect, or what to collect? Most libraries, like I mentioned, 6 to 800 cartridges released. You're not going to be able to feasibly, there are collectors out there who actually obtain the entire library. But most of the time, you're not going to find somebody who has the money, especially now that the prices have been driven up, who have the money to actually do that. And most of those people who owned an entire library or came close to owning an entire library, if there were that many cartridges out there, concentrated on pretty much just that system. So if somebody owns an entire Nintendo library, most likely they're not going to own, an entire Intellivision library, ColecoVision library, all these other systems, because, your average person doesn't have, an unlimited supply of money. So, what do you collect? So you might want to collect the system and say, okay, I'm going to collect a library of this system. That's fine. Some people like specific games. So you want, I think I've mentioned before, Donkey Kong and Mario related games. Again, it's feasible that if you wanted to collect, all these related games to Donkey Kong and Mario, you might be able to do so for each system, because that came out in 1982, and each system might have had, especially early on, there might be 2 or 3 released games. Now if you get into the variations, you might be 8 to 15 for each system. So what? um, as Nintendo came out and Mario became their character, you might have 6, 7 different games, and then 25, 30 variations. And again, that might be feasible. Unless, again, you want it to collect, just to collect, to have, is pretty easy. You could find loose cartridges. You could even find complete and box cartridges, probably at reasonable prices. It's the sealed. That's where people are, say, oh, it's like $700 or $1,000 sealed, or $12,000 sealed. As a collector, you don't need sealed. And if you're collecting, a lot of times you're playing. And I mentioned in the Intellivision, computers have fans built inside. And I also mentioned about the Commodore 64. The power supplies used to burn out all the time. And back then, in the mid 80s, they were $60 a piece. So, you tried to keep your power supply working. And so my suggestion, and I think we started doing this when we realized, okay, we're burning out some power supplies. We'd have a small fan and blow it on the power supply. Or if it's built into the system, like the Intellivision, I mentioned, one of the games systems I sold, the guy used it for 3 days and then it burned out. So if you're going to play vintage, games on vintage systems, cool. You need to keep it cool. So buy a small fan, put the fan directly on the system, and you'll have a good time. Like I said, I tried to test every cartridge that I would sell that was loose. If it was complete in box, that's still technically loose. It's been opened, so I didn't want somebody saying, okay, I plugged it in my system and it doesn't work. And sometimes that would happen. I would test, and then maybe it wouldn't. I was testing every game, not selling it. So sometimes my games are sitting there for 15 years. I tested it 15 years prior. It worked. Maybe it's still, maybe it doesn't work now. So what do? I try to retest before I put it on. I keep looking over there because that's where my Atari is. But I try to retest the games to make sure they work. And, you're a happy customer, you got a repeat customer. Especially if you could find stuff, on their list. Or, some people, like I said, they don't have too much money. They only buy a few games at a time. So video games, what am I going to cover? I already said if I could find, I have the RCA Studio 2, the Fairchild. I'd like to do at least, even if I don't do their own episodes, and combine a couple of systems, onto an episode, that's fine too. Vectrex, I definitely wanted to at least cover some of that. I have a decent library. I don't have a lot of rare stuff. Again, I didn't pursue a lot of things. The Bally Astrocade, I actually did. So hopefully I'm going to find that. I have a Mattel Aquarius, a VIC-20. That's by Commodore, besides the 64. And then the Commodore went to 128. But the Commodore itself has tons and tons of computer variations and stuff worldwide. And my suggestion is, if you decide you want to try to collect, a Commodore, say, I always mention the same words. Do your homework. Figure out where you want to focus, because again, besides money, you always have space, and you buy systems, and are you going to uh, be able to fit everything? If you have rooms to dedicate to this stuff, that's fine. So besides those other games, other systems and stuff, I wasn't planning on cover Genesis, or I might cover Dreamcast. I have a decent amount of Sega Dreamcast games. I wasn't really going to cover Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64, not even GameCube, because I'd never really collected that stuff. I might have a couple games, but my knowledge of that, especially recommending what's investing or whatever, even in Nintendo, I have 520 Nintendo games, and getting advice from one of my coworkers. He's trying to lead me on, because he's the one who actually owned an entire Nintendo library at one point. And prices get high enough, you sell your stuff and you can buy. Hopefully you could retire, but you always think, yeah, you're going to retire on it, and then prices don't go up. But if you wait 30 years and you're young, you might be able to retire by the time you hit 65. I mentioned TurboGrafx. That's another one I'm probably going to cover. I do have a decent amount of TurboGrafx, and sometimes these systems, besides cartridges, they had cassettes, they had CDs. Sometimes they had the peripherals. You just plug them into the actual system, and then you can use other media. Well, I mean, it's the same company, but they have a Turbo CD, they have Sega CD. So there's a lot out there. And again, if you're collecting a specific character or a specific game, so like Pac-Man, they made all these variations. They got Miss Pac-Man, they got Pac-Man Jr., or Super Pac-Man, or whatever. Or say you want Star Wars. Star Wars is another one that's feasible, to collect. Because why? Atari 2600 had 4 games, and the ColecoVision might have 2 games. Did they have 2 or 1? No, I think they had 2. And Television had 1. So trying to collect all the Star Wars games. If you're not bothering with variations, it's pretty easy. You're a Star Wars collector, and that's where the cross collectability comes in. But I did mention, and I'm going to probably end with this. There are games that were geared for kids. You'll see, and people, VTech is the one that comes into mind. But there's a Fisher Price cycle. I'm trying to think of what it was. When I was going around in probably, I don't know, it was 2010 to 2014 or something. Toy stores. It was a Kmart or Target or Toys R Us. I think KB might have been gone by the time I started buying these games. But especially Kmart, they were like $20 games, and they're geared for kids. This VTech system, so it'll say for ages 2 to 5 or 3 to 6 or something like that. And I was buying up, because a lot of times they were like 90% off. I was getting these games for $1 or $2. And that's the time, just like the O'Shea I mentioned. That guy who was selling Atari games for I paid under $1. I heard when he finally got rid of whatever he had left, he was asking $5 a game. But even then, that's probably a decent price. But, is there going to be collectability in there? Investment-wise, probably not. But again, you're talking 10. I don't know when VTech actually started. I think I have some kind of a VTech system from the late 80s. I don't think I have any cartridges for it. I have no clue. I was just opening boxes, and I found this thing. It said VTech, and I'm not too sure if it was dated 87 or something. But is there going to be collectability? If you were a little kid in, say, mid-90s, now you're in your 30, 20, 25, 30 years old already. And again, it's always been about nostalgia. That's what all these collectibles, for the most part, is about nostalgia. Stuff you had when you were a kid. And it's not necessarily even something, because Atari is lame with the graphics, especially early on. But it's the reliving of it. And sometimes you use these systems as a jumping on point for your own children. And, I mentioned in one of the videos, some of these kids at 5 years old can use a a phone now like it's nothing. They're just so advanced with stuff. But if you're going to try to introduce your child to some video games, a lot of these are innocent. And, the VTech was about learning. Smart Cycle, Fisher Price Smart Cycle. And I think it was physical too. You sat in, you played. And they had games like Scooby-Doo, a lot of Disney with the princess stuff, and Nemo. I remember because I was just buying this stuff like crazy. Dora the Explorer and Diego. This stuff you didn't have when you were, Scooby-Doo. I said there was one in television game, but, I grew up with Scooby-Doo. In fact, Scooby-Doo came out the year before I was born. That's how long Scooby-Doo has been around. And they've, changed them around. They've created all these new cartoons of them. But again, I paid $1. I was selling them for, especially the Smart Cycle. I was getting $20 for it. And, I thought about doing a video on those newer things. And I said I was going to end on this, but actually I wanted to mention one other thing. Handheld or electronic games, I'm actually going to give them their own video. And, I grew up again, the late 70s. You had this little advent of all these little handheld electronic games, and Mattel came out and Coleco came out. And, so then you had Head to Head. It was a great time. And, again, they're little LEDs they use inside. So you just see a little red dot or something, and that was your player and stuff. And so I know I have a decent amount of handheld stuff. And then you had the mini arcades. And if you go to, some of these retail stores, you'll see mini arcade versions. Sometimes you see almost full-size arcade versions for $150, $200 and stuff. And it's why? Because it's nostalgia. So, hopefully, we'll go through as much as I can with the video games, and then I'll move on to comic books, and we'll take it from there. Okay, see you next time. Oh, I never say, if you want, like, share, subscribe, whatever, make comments, ask questions, because if you have any suggestions, that would be good. If they say, oh, can you cover this? And, like I said, if I can cover something and I have enough knowledge of it, or if I can find out about enough information on it, I'll cover it. So anyway, now I'll see you next time. All right, bye.